As a longtime Pokemon fan, it's disappointing to be constantly, disappointed in Pokemon. For the longest time, I'd play simply because it felt like there weren't any good alternatives. I knew Digimon games existed, but it felt distant to me. Hell, Digimon World Dawn was one of my favorite Pokemon games growing up, and it wasn't even a Pokemon game. But the games weren't really advertised well enough for me to keep track of them, especially as a kid with limited internet access, and games like Shin Megami Tensei weren't even on my radar. But since the release and ensuing legal chaos of Palworld, the monster catching genre has seen a huge resurgence that doesn't show any signs of stopping, despite Nintendo's best efforts. My favorite genre of modern gaming lately has been Pokemon fans growing up and making their own version of what they wished Pokemon could be. And while I don't know if that was Morai Games' goal when creating Aethermancer, they've done a great job as far as I'm concerned, choosing to focus on the battling side of the monster catching genre while adding a fun roguelite twist. There's not much I can say about the designs of the monsters within Aethermancer, as I'm not an artist myself. The creatures feel creatively inspired and unique in their own ways. Some creatures feel as simple as, what if we took a ferret and also made it a weird worm-looking thing, while other creatures like Jotun feel like they took a more mythological approach. And then some creatures, like this weird sorcerer squid-looking thing, feel like the creators just said screw it and started drawing weird stuff, and I mean that as a compliment. I call it a weird sorcerer squid thing because the games give you the option to immediately name a monster once you summoned it, and that name persists between runs, which can make it a little difficult to keep track of their real names. I'd honestly love it if the devs added some kind of compendium or Pokédex equivalent for the full release, as I'd love to just look at all the creatures and learn more about them. Editing Sam here. It turns out the mysterious journal option that I'm going to harp on about later in this video is meant to serve as a sort of Pokédex, so that's already one issue I have with this game, confirmed to have an upcoming solution. I'd like to start with a quick rundown of the basic combat mechanics Aethermancer is working with. Combat at its face value is similar to other creature catching games in the sense that you fight with a team of monsters, fighting against other team of monsters in turn-based combat by selecting actions, but past that point is where the gameplay really begins to deviate, save for the presence of elemental types. Similar to Pokemon and most other creature catching games, each monster as well as its actions has one or two elemental types tied to it. There are less overall types, however, with it split between fire, water, earth, air, lightning, and void, which serves as a substitute for other elements. I really appreciate this deviation, as the elements presented do cover a lot of ground, while not forcing me to remember 18 different types, not to mention all of the type combinations. While I may have all of Pokemon's type combinations hard memorized into my head from when I was a kid, I don't even want to imagine doing something like that as an adult, so I definitely appreciate the simplicity of Aethermancer's elemental types. Rather than having outright elemental advantages, however, elements are only relevant in regards to Aether, Stagger, and some special action features. Aether, as it's referred to, is something akin to mana in other games, in the sense that Aether is what powers each move available to a given monster. At the beginning of each turn, Aether is generated from each monster, pulling from a possible pool tied not just to the monster's element, but also what kind of elemental actions they possess as well, ensuring all of their actions are usable even if they're not usable all the time, though performing a basic attack will also generate Aether. Actions also have elements tied to them in terms of the damage they deal, as well as the cost required to use an action, with the more powerful and impactful actions requiring more Aether. Aether management is an important aspect to the strategy of battle, as blowing all of your fire Aether on your first monster's powerful action might ensure that one of your other monsters can't use the action you want. I honestly really enjoy this system over having a limited number of action uses or having cooldowns, as it can lead to you comboing some seriously crazy attacks and abilities throughout your team by properly saving your Aether, though it can also be a little frustrating when you're working with a team that doesn't generate Aether well, so it feels like you're never able to use your more powerful actions. So there's a trade-off to the system, but I ultimately think it's a worthwhile trade-off since generating Aether is a whole part of the strategy of the game. There's even more to talk about in regards to Aether management, as well as keeping track of your opponent's Aether, but I'll save that for later. For now I want to talk about staggering and poise. Staggering is the other core mechanic relevant to elements and serves as a substitute for your classic elemental advantages, but it's done in a way that doesn't spell your doom just because you didn't bring the right type matchup. Basically, each monster has a colored diamond next to their health bar with a number attached to it, representing that monster's poise. Doing damage that corresponds to that color will reduce its poise based on the number of hits, as well as other factors like traits. Once that number hits 0, a creature is staggered, interrupting their upcoming action, though in the case of champion boss encounters, only one action will be interrupted. On top of that, staggered enemies will also take increased damage. Importantly, your monsters cannot be staggered, but they have to deal with corruption to make up for it, which I'll delve into in a bit. I think the staggering mechanics in Aethermancers are really cool. Type advantages can kind of feel like a cheat code in other games, with many fights feeling like they are solely determined by who has the type advantage, and while strategy can get more complicated for competitive battlers, your average fan of the creature catching genre is just going to win a fight by pitting water against fire. Staggering, on the other hand, still rewards you for having a diverse team, but it makes you work to make the most of that advantage while taking into account other factors like how many hits are in each attack. I also really enjoy how your monsters don't have to worry about poise, so you're not getting randomly BS'd by a lucky attack, but your monsters still have to worry about corruption, so they're not free from risk. Overall, staggering is a key strategy to taking down difficult enemies, especially once they've had time to generate a lot of ether, and is also tied to how you catch new monsters. Catching may not be the best term to use when acquiring new monsters. You don't just throw a Pokeball once your enemy is low and hope RNGesus is on your side. In Aethermancer you have what are called blank mementos, which can be acquired as a loot drop after winning an encounter, as well as bought through the merchant NPC. Blank mementos have a 100% success rate, but there are a few caveats to that. For one, a blank memento can only be used once a monster is staggered. Monsters aren't removed from combat once the memento is used either, but are instead added to the pool of monsters that can be summoned at the shrine that appears at the beginning of each area. So although there's no RNG involved with acquiring new monsters, it still takes effort and it doesn't immediately benefit you since you still have to fight the monster afterwards and you have to wait for it to pop up at the shrine. Once you've made it to a shrine, you can spend a monster soul, which is a currency that can be found throughout a run, to summon a new monster to fill out your team, or replace a monster you already have, with the number of monster options available tied to the number of souls you possess. While it's easy to grow attached to the team you already have, there might be a more specific team comp that you're looking for, or maybe that new monster you made a memento for is available and you want to try it out right away. Another incentive to swap out a creature might just be that they've become far too corrupted. Corruption is the bane of my existence and will be yours too. That bit I mentioned earlier about how only monsters can be staggered? Sounds nice, right? Well, the game levels a more silent and slow killer against you in the form of corruption. From a lore standpoint, corruption is what is slowly killing NPCs that venture too far outside Pilgrim's Rest, which is the village you're located in, and is the force your character Syrinx is fighting against, and the game does a pretty good job of representing that from a gameplay perspective as well. Basically, whenever your monster takes a heavy hit, you'll see a number come up alongside a messed up heart symbol representing corruption. I don't entirely understand the math behind corruption, but from my understanding, the more unblocked damage you take from an attack, the more corruption you gain, and unfortunately, the damage threshold for acquiring just 1 or 2 points of corruption seems to be pretty low. Corruption doesn't really present itself much in battle, save for a small purple bar underneath your health bar. It becomes much more evident once the battle is done. Every point of corruption a monster gets is a point taken at the beginning of combat. So if a monster has 10 corruption, they will begin the next fight missing 10 HP. This can be made up for if you have a strong healer on your team. It'll still require an action to heal, and corruption can be devastating on a team without strong healing. Certain events you stumble across can reduce your corruption, whereas other events allows you to intentionally corrupt your monsters in exchange for a buff. You always have the option to cleanse a sizable chunk of corruption at the end of each area. The option is only available after you've defeated that area's champion, potentially putting you into a really bad position if you're walking into that encounter with a lot of corruption. Overall, I think corruption can be very annoying, but I believe it's a necessary evil and is a better alternative than your monsters having poise, which I imagine would lead to enemy monsters snowballing and steamrolling you. Corruption is frustrating, but it exists as a mechanic to prevent your team from becoming far too powerful too quickly. Monster types are another important mechanic that I couldn't find a good place to squeeze in and talk about, so here we are. Each monster has a number of types found on their summary that classifies what kind of monster they are, and also gives you an idea of what kind of moves they can learn. For instance, Jotun's types are Tank, Shield, and Age, which at a glance gives you the general idea that he's good at protecting the rest of your team. He specializes in providing shields to do so, and he has the potential to grow more powerful the longer a fight goes on. That's speaking very broadly, since shields can be useful for more than just defense, and Age isn't just about doing more damage, but you get the basic idea. Understanding a monster's types can give you a good idea of what to expect from them at a glance and defines their playstyle, which makes things even more interesting later on once you're able to acquire versions of monsters with altered types, or you even start swapping out types yourself. More on that in a bit, but first I want to talk a little about Aethermancer's story and roguelite mechanics. Unfortunately, from a story standpoint, there isn't a whole lot going on in Aethermancer, at least not yet. The game does have lore, and I can tell the developers do have a good idea of what the world is and how it works, but they're not doing a whole lot with it at the moment. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing though. From my admittedly limited experience with roguelites, the genre isn't typically very story heavy, and even the games that deviate from that, such as Hades, tend to stretch that story pretty far, providing breadcrumbs and new bits of dialogue and character interaction between runs, rather than major story developments. I won't speak too much on that though, as I still haven't finished Hades. Aethermancer, on the other hand, doesn't give much story-wise. There's mention of the void that is corrupting the land and the surrounding monsters, and your character Syrinx is there to find the source and stop it. But beyond intermittent dialogue discussing his intentions with other NPCs, his progress isn't ever really shown. Even once you've completed a run and have beaten the game as best you can, there isn't much of a resolution or an explanation as to why you're still making runs. That being said, I want to give full disclosure that I've only defeated the final boss twice at the time of this recording, and upon my second attempt at beating him, as well as successfully defeating him for the second time, there was different dialogue going in, so it is possible that the story does expand the more you play. I plan on making a sort of update video once Aethermancer is out of early access and I have more successful runs under my belt, and we'll discuss any expansions to the story I see while trying to keep it relatively spoiler-free. Editing Sam here again. So, I was very wrong. Shortly after writing this segment, I decided to attempt another run on Vestige 1, which is a new difficulty you unlock after completing a run for the first time. My previous attempts had failed, but this time around, I actually made it to the final boss, and without spoiling much, things are very different, like very, very different, both in terms of combat and story. Like, I think I just finally cracked the story wide open, which shouldn't surprise me too much since my previous example with Hades, I've heard that the game's story also expands quite a bit once you've completed a run. So yeah, I did not give Aethermancer's story enough credit, but I still haven't progressed far enough to comment too much yet. And if I wait until I've done everything this game has to offer, this video will never come out. So anyways, if you're interested in the spoilery version of this revelation I had it while recording a video that was just supposed to be a more hands-on example of gameplay that turned into much, much more. And I'll be posting it sometime after this video goes up. Just be warned that I fully spoil the Vestige 1 final boss. While the monsters and the actual combat mechanics are solid, I initially feared that the roguelite aspect of the game might be underbaked. While I do think there are a few areas that could be improved, I do enjoy the overall package. I want to first talk about the worthiness system, as that seems to be the most polished and impactful form of meta progression currently in the game, and is also one of the few actively referenced in the game's lore. Worthiness is the most obvious form of progression in the game, yet it can be difficult to identify what it actually does at first. While each monster is capable in its own right, their effectiveness can be improved even further through raising their worthiness, which grants them a perk as well as an amount of ether crystals, which I'll get into later. Perks usually contain a small buff that's relevant to the monster in some way that may seem insignificant, but can make a difference in the long run. Some examples include a perk that allows you to generate an extra ether, or a perk that increases the amount of burn damage your attacks inflict, or a perk that gives you a small amount of shields at the beginning of combat. These perks aren't so game-changing that it's impossible to complete a run without them, but they can make completing a run easier, especially playing on higher difficulties, and it can make a monster feel more complete, in a sense, by putting a focus on something the monster was already good at. Worthiness is gained primarily just by doing stuff in combat. If your monster is healing well, they gain worthiness. If they're dealing a lot of damage, they gain worthiness. If they're generating a lot of ether, they gain worthiness and whatnot. There are a few out-of-combat sources of worthiness as well, but there's usually a cost tied to it. If I had to level one complaint against the worthiness system, it's how few worthiness levels there are overall. While worthiness levels can be increased practically indefinitely, and you will continue to earn a small amount of ether crystals with each level, you only gain perks up to worthiness level 5, which feels like a bit of a letdown, especially given the difficulty options you're given. Maybe this is done for balancing reasons, as the perks gained can be rather impactful, or maybe additional rewards or something planned for the future, but that's just my take. I've mentioned ether crystals previously, but have yet to delve into what they are and what they're used for. While gold exists as a currency to be spent on merchants during runs, ether crystals are your currency for upgrades in between runs. There are numerous NPCs that you'll meet throughout your runs, and talking to them will make them show up back in town. Unfortunately, most of these NPCs have little to no purpose at the moment, and only exist to give you a single line of dialogue. If I'm being generous, I'd like to predict that these NPCs will be quest givers in the future, given that they currently serve no purpose, and there's a journal option in the pause menu that's currently grayed out, but I won't talk much on speculation. Editing Sam here. As you know, I was wrong about the journal, but who knows, maybe there's more hope for NPCs in the future. I'd like to see more from them personally. There are some NPCs, however, that do serve a greater purpose in the form of helpful boons during a run, new bits of lore, and most importantly, upgrades that persist between runs. These upgrades are varied, but do tend to fall into themes based on the NPC. For instance, the Mayor NPC tends to give you upgrades based around currency, such as more starting gold. The Envoy gives you upgrades dealing with monster and monster tamer specific stuff. And the Knight, well, I'll get into the Knight more in a bit. But yeah, these upgrades can be purchased with ether crystals and can make subsequent runs less of a hassle. One of the more interesting NPCs you can speak to is a cute little frog lady known as the Witch. Rather than specific upgrades, you can spend ether crystals with her to form soul bonds with your monsters. Soul bonds can be formed with any monster you have a memento of, and allows you to start a run with that monster. Soul bonds become more expensive to form when made with boss monsters or monsters appearing in late game areas, but in general, soul bonds are pretty cheap to form, ensuring that you can use your favorite monster as much as you'd like. Now that I've explained the core mechanics of the game, I'd like to do a quick rundown of what a run might look like for anyone who's interested in the game, but is maybe still on the fence. As your run begins, you spawn in a seemingly peaceful forest area with a shrine standing before you. Interacting with the shrine, you are presented with 3 monster options. You pick your monster, let's say Jotun, because he's sick and I'm biased, and you delve deeper into the forest. As you wander through, you come across numerous sparkling objects that grant you gold and ether crystals. You also encounter many monsters at one point, but manage to get the jump on them, providing you with a solid advantage going in. You encounter a small dragon creature you've never seen before called a wormling, and after breaking its poise, you manage to get a memento of it. You continue to travel through, fighting a few more monsters along the way, and even encounter an out-of-place monsterkin who appears to be lost. You're able to direct them back to town. As you travel further, you eventually come across 3 portals. One says it leads to the Envoy, another leads to a random NPC, and the last leads to something called an Ether Spring. You, paralyzed by choice because you barely played this game, decide to go for the random NPC. Appearing on the other side of the portal, you are immediately greeted by another shrine. Still having a solid number of monster souls on hand, check it out and spot that the wormling you just obtained a memento of is available and decide to summon it. Though he may seem a little weak at first, he does a great job of providing your team with extra ether, and he even provides some solid offensive buffs, so you welcome him to your team and name him something stupid like Baby Dragon, because you never truly got over your Yu-Gi-Oh phase. Traveling past the shrine, you encounter a tall man in plate armor who offers you a choice between 2 pieces of equipment for your monsters. This must be the random NPC you were looking for. You notice that one of the pieces of equipment has the primary effect that buffs applied to the wielder have a chance to be doubled, and the equipment has the secondary effect where the wielder can generate an extra ether. Given that your baby dragon can apply buffs and share them with teammates, and your baby dragon is already generating quite a lot of ether, it seems like a perfect match. Take your new equipment and you move on. You continue along, fighting random monsters as you go, leveling up, learning new move actions and passive traits, and begin to gain a level of familiarity with each portal you pass through. At one point, the Jotun on your team intercepts an attack that's a bit too much for him to take, and he falls in battle. You silently sob to yourself because Jotun is easily the coolest monster in the game, and him dying so your baby dragon could live was manly as hell, but you eventually move on and summon a new monster from the shrine. You continue improving your team, gathering new gear, and filling out your team's moves and traits, when eventually you stumble across an area that feels different. The area is a bit narrower, and rather than the assortment of monsters you've grown accustomed to, there is a single imposing monster with a strange aura in the distance. You go to fight him and quickly realize your suspicions were correct. This is not some normal monster, but rather a champion monster. His poise is much higher and split between 2 elements, and he's attacking twice per turn. You put up a valiant fight, but with his oppressive damage, it's difficult to defend yourself, put out enough damage simultaneously, and your new monster isn't as defensive as Jotun was. Eventually, your team crumbles and your run is over. Return to Pilgrim's Rest with your ether crystals, upgrade what you can, and prepare for your next run. Obviously, there's more to the game than what I presented in my little example, but I'm not trying to spoil the entire experience of finding things out for yourself, and I believe that detailing every single possibility in a run would drive you and me insane. But that's a general idea of what to expect. And to anyone wondering, if you were to win against the champion monster, there are more areas to explore than the initial starting area, and there are new monsters in each area. But going forward, I would like to delve a little into spoiler territories, discuss some of the cool things that unlock after you manage to successfully complete a run for the first time. If you'd like to avoid my post-game spoiler discussions, feel free to skip to my final thoughts here. I don't have a whole lot to say about the higher difficulties in Aethermancer, as my experience with it is pretty limited, mostly because I'm bad. But after completing a run for the first time, you unlock Vestige 1, which is a higher difficulty featuring enemies with more health, monsters with an additional trait, and a corruption cap of 99%, meaning that if your monsters get hella corrupted, they could in theory start a fight with 1 HP, when on the default difficulty, Vestige 0, corruption is only capped at 75%. As a trade-off for the higher difficulty, monsters gain worthiness at an increased rate. From my understanding, higher vestige levels continue to increase the difficulty beyond just adding more health, but I won't speak to that as I've yet to beat the game at Vestige 1 at the time of this recording. But the point is, unless you are the absolute Pokemon master that lives, eats, and breathes competitive battling, I imagine this game will continue to challenge you. Editing Sam here, one more time. I don't really have a whole lot to say this time, but yeah, I did play around a bit more with Vestige 1 since the time of writing, and yeah, it's for sure difficult. It seems deceptively not that bad at first, and then you start to notice that you're consistently getting your ass kicked, and you are not leaving any fight unscathed. It's no joke, but it's also a lot of fun. You know, 10 out of 10 would get my ass beat again. Something many of Pokemon fans have likely been wondering throughout this video is, what about the shinies? Aethermancer sort of has an answer to this, but how satisfactory it is will vary from person to person. In short, if you value shinies as some super rare trophy to hunt for, you will likely be disappointed. But Aethermancer does provide an interesting twist on the subject. After completing a run for the first time, you will find the Knight NPC chilling near spawn in Pilgrim's Rest. He'll also appear if you speak with him enough times during runs. The Knight will explain to you the appearance of shifted monsters and will sell you associated upgrades for Ether Crystals, including the upgrade required for them to begin spawning. Shifted monsters have a 5% chance to spawn in regular encounters, 10% during ambush encounters, and a 15% chance during hidden or champion encounters, though upgrades purchased from the Knight can significantly increase these chances. Each monster has a shifted variant, with that variant possessing a different color scheme, as well as a different type, different element, or different actions, traits, health, stats, etc. A shifted monster may not have all of those aspects altered, but at the very least they will have the different color scheme as well as a few other altered attributes. So, if you're looking for a rare trophy that's pretty to look at and nothing more, you might be disappointed by all the additional alterations present in each monster, as well as how relatively easy they are to find compared to a shiny Pokemon. But if you wanted a bit more depth to shinies as a concept and wanted them to be a bit more accessible, shifted monsters are something you will likely enjoy. Something that can also be purchased from the Knight once he's in Pilgrim's Rest is access to a new initial area called the Alchemical Woods, featuring a new environment, new monsters, and a couple of new champion monsters. Unfortunately, there are no new areas beyond the Alchemical Woods at the time of this recording, but other new biomes have been teased. It may not be a lot right now, but the Alchemical Woods does provide a refreshing change of pace when starting a run, and the addition of new monsters is always welcome. Finally, upon completing a run for the first time, the Alchemist class is unlocked, providing an alternate playstyle. I didn't really detail the specifics of what the Aether Tamer, the default class, does, as this video has already gone on long enough, but the Aether Tamer's playstyle is pretty simple by design, with its main benefit being its ability to do extra poise damage when ambushing monsters. While it does have some other features, they're not really worth mentioning here. The Alchemist, on the other hand, makes a big difference in how you play the game without taking the spotlight away from the stars of the show, or monsters. When interacting with a monster shrine, the Alchemist has the unique and powerful ability to spend a monster soul to take a type, element, or trait from one of the monsters available for summoning and transplant it with one of your monsters, dramatically changing its playstyle depending on what you pick. Though this feat does come at a cost as it corrupts the affected monster with more impactful changes inflicting more corruption. I haven't spent a ton of time with the Alchemist at the time of this recording. If I'm being honest, I think I prefer the simplicity of the Aether Tamer, but there's no denying that the Alchemist provides a new layer of strategy into what was already a fairly strategic gameplay loop, and in the right hands, the Alchemist has the potential to be powerful for sure. So, my intention behind this Indie Spotlight series isn't to endlessly glaze the games I'm covering, nor is it to discuss every minute detail of the game like a formal review, but rather my intention is to shine a light on smaller games that might not get the attention they deserve. to tell you all what you can expect from this game so you can decide if it's worth buying. I've become pretty disillusioned with AAA games lately, and I found myself experiencing a bit of an indie renaissance, but I acknowledge that a lot of people don't have as much experience with indie games and might not know what to look for. Sure, no, I didn't when I first started getting into indies. That was a bit of a tangent, but one that I think is important for a first video. It is also important because even though I just said this series isn't about glazing indies, I'm about to seriously glaze Aethermancer. Overall, I think Aethermancer would be a seriously addicting game for anyone wishing for a creature battling game with more depth and mechanics than your standard Pokemon game. I hate to keep bringing up Pokemon as a point of comparison, especially when Aethermancer is quite different, but I believe it's the creature catching game people are most familiar with. That being said, if you're looking for a game that's just better Pokemon, you might be disappointed with this title. Battling is front and center, but the mechanics surrounding catching new monsters really takes a backseat comparatively, and rather than having a linear progression through the game, such as Pokemon's gym leaders and story, you have roguelite mechanics to contend with instead. To be clear, I don't think any of this is a bad thing, but let it be known this game isn't just better Pokemon. What Aethermancer is a fun roguelite creature battling game with intricate and varied mechanics that allow for a large variety of combat strategies and team synergy. The moves, passives, and overall strategy of each monster is shaped by how you want to play. And if you get tired of focusing on one specific aspect of a monster's playstyle, there are other aspects you can focus on instead, or you can try to blend all of their playstyles together. This variety only gets deeper as you try to make each of your monsters synergize with one another. And that's not even getting into shifted monsters and the alchemist class and how it's able to modify those playstyles even further. I'd say the roguelite mechanics present within each run doesn't freshen things up too dramatically. They do help to shape your run, while the meta progression upgrades available in between runs, as well as the worthiness system, makes you feel like you're always growing stronger. At the time of recording, Aethermancer is still in early access, and as such is incomplete. I hope in the future there'll be more to do with NPCs, or areas to explore, and I'd love to see what the story looks like in the final product. But for a game that's still in early access, the game is shockingly polished and with a solid amount of content. It's a game I highly recommend, and a game I will gladly revisit upon its full release. Okay, and that was the video, and yet here I am, still rambling. Don't really know what to say here. Don't really know how to do this. This is my first video, and I really don't know what I'm doing, as I'm sure you can tell by the multitude of mistakes that are present. But if you are here and you are watching, thank you for that. It's appreciated. I'm sure I'll be very embarrassed about it later, but that's, that's a problem for later. Yeah, as I was kind of talking about earlier, I really just wanted to make a series to bring more attention to indies. I really haven't been playing a lot of AAA games lately. Part of that is because I've just been sort of disappointed with them. I could make an entire video talking about why I've been disappointed with AAA lately, but it's just a lot of the creativity just doesn't feel like it's really there anymore. And on top of that, I'm poor, and I live in the United States, and things are very expensive right now, and I do not make a lot of money. So yeah, dropping between $60 to $80 on a game just to be disappointed by it, not a great feeling. Whereas indie games, there are so many games. So many of them are just good and creative and innovative, and they're cheap. I hate to have that as a main selling point, because obviously, an indie developer puts a lot of effort into their game. It should be worth more than $20, but on God, a game being $20 makes it a lot more available and a lot more justifiable to purchase. And I think that's kind of a big reason why I didn't want to make this into a review. For one, I don't have the time to do a full review. I work 40 hours a week, and I have a roommate whose schedule I have to work around as well. I have very limited time to do this, and the level of completeness I would need to play through a game to actually make a formal review, I it would take me multiple months just to get a single video out, and I don't really want to do that. Um I had a point that I was making with that, and I lost it. But yeah, I just wanted to do more of a spotlight because I think with indie games being cheaper, it's a lot easier to just give a general idea of what the game is about, as well as some opinions, and be like, hey, if that sounds interesting, buy it, find it for yourself. At worst, you miss out on $20. I don't actually know if Aethermancers is $20. I don't remember how much it is offhand, but it's definitely not 60. Um, but it's a lot harder to justify that with a AAA title. Like, oh, I think this game is great. Spend $80 on it, and if it's bad and my review didn't, sell it properly, sorry, my bad, oopsie, teehee. I just I don't want to do that. Um, but yeah. The other thing I just wanted to mention real quick, I swear I won't make every outro this long. I have ADHD. I can ramble. Uh, Sorry for all of the Pokemon roasting I've done. It wasn't supposed to come off as roasting, but looking back at the video, it's what it kind of sounds like. I do actually enjoy Pokemon. I'm a longtime Pokemon fan. The first video game I ever owned was Pokemon Diamond. Um, in part just because I'm sorry, I just got an error pop up on my recording software, and that scared me and made me lose my train of thought. Now, I wasn't really allowed to play video games as a kid, so I was pretty late to the video game scene, and Pokemon Diamond was my first Pokemon game. So I do really enjoy Pokemon. I just don't enjoy Pokemon as much now. And unfortunately, I feel that that kind of shows in the video. So if you enjoy Pokemon and are offended by my takes, my bad, dude. But it's not personal. If you love Pokemon, play Pokemon. If you want something different, maybe try this instead. Um, but yeah, I'm gonna stop rambling because I still don't know what that error I got means. So I don't know. For all I know, none of this is getting picked up. But if you are watching this, thank you for watching. If no one ever watches this, hi Void, how are you doing? Bye.